Hi, I'm Michael Pietsch, and I'm very happy to be here hosting The Current and to welcome a writer I've had the pleasure of working with for well over 20 years, the mighty Peter Guralnick. Peter is the author of many of the most esteemed and celebrated books about American music that have ever been written. Congratulations and welcome.
Well, thanks.
Peter, when reading this book, innumerable songs come through your head because it's about song after song after song, and there's at the end of the book you lead readers to other places they might find the music that you talk about. But a song kept running through my head that wasn't by any of these artists. It's the Wilco song, "I'm Always in Love." And that's because what I feel when I read this book is so much love from you to the people you're writing about. And it seems to me that a lot of your relationships with these artists went from interviews to friendships to something much, much deeper. Especially I see that with Solomon Burke, with Dick Curlis, and even
with Doc Thomas.
Doc Thomas. So my question is, are you always in love, Peter?
Always. I'm always in love. I mean, not necessarily in love every moment of every day with the person I'm writing about. I'm always in admiration. I would be hypocritical if I were to say that I was or could always be in love with Merle Haggard, but I was always in love with Merle Haggard's music and self-expression. And my waking nightmare, when I told you that, I had determined when I started the Sam Phillips biography, which it took me a number of years to decide I wanted to do it. But when I started it, I had made the determination this was it. I wasn't, it takes so much out of you. Total immersion, total and full engagement in all this. And I felt like I also had my life to lead, and I did continue to lead my life. But my waking nightmare was that Merle Haggard was going to call me up sometime in the middle of the night. And he would say, Pete, I've been reading some of your stuff. It's not too bad. I think we could really do something together. And had he done that, I knew it would never happen, but had he done that, I could never have turned him down. Just as if Solomon had taken up my invitation. I mean, this was such a great moment when I gave Solomon the Sam Cooke biography. Solomon Burke we're speaking of here. Mm-hmm. And I gave Solomon the Sam Cooke biography. And the next time I saw him, he says, Pete, this is a great book. So this is a great book. But when are we going to do the book? and I tried to get Solomon to start the book, which was the book about him. That's the one book I would have done as a first-person narration, and without any self-aggrandizement or without patting myself on the shoulder or anything. I don't have any doubt it would have been a great book because he was such an amazing storyteller and also such an insightful person. But I also knew Solomon quite well. I loved Solomon. I was never out of love with Solomon. But I also knew that whatever his good intentions, and his intentions almost all the time were good, he didn't necessarily follow through on his plans. And he might say to me, hey, Pete, listen, come on out to California, come on out to LA. Hey, I'll send you the ticket. Now that was a no starter right from the start. You didn't take it. You didn't wait for a ticket from Solomon, and nor did you want to. He said, but I'll send you a ticket and I'll find you a place to stay. Forget all that part. What I was concerned about was, and we'll spend 2 weeks on the book. This is not a real conversation, but we talked around this. But I just always felt like I could show up in LA and find out he was in Prague, when I arrived. And I just couldn't count him. So I tried to get him to start telling, not the story of his life, but some key moments in his life, 3 or 4, to his daughter, Victoria, who had gone into the funeral business like himself, and who I think most of all his kids most resembled him. And I say, so talk to her about when you were the Wonder Boy preacher, when you were 7, 8, 9. So Solomon says, well, how about when I was 10? And I said, well, yeah, sure, when you're 10. Did something happen when you were 10? He says, that's when they put me out in the streets. And I said, well, who put you out in the streets? And he says, I never could find out. And then I said, well, why did they put you in the streets? And he says, I never, maybe that was when he said, I never could find out it was, I just never knew. And then he burst into tears. Now,
Wow.
and that was the last 3 times I saw him, each time he burst into tears. And I wasn't twisting his arm. I wasn't asking him any questions that I thought were, I wasn't even asking questions. He would start on something. It sort of showed how deeply emotional and how serious he was, underneath. But in this case, I sort of came to find, I explore a little bit some of what happened to him in the book, but really I never found out what it was that prompted that just emotional outpouring. And he never did talk to Victoria. I talked to Victoria, she was all for it. I talked to a mutual friend of ours who posed it to sell him, but he never did do it. One of the very few regrets in my life, not to have done that book.
Now, a lot of the musicians that we admire, I think, have written books of their own and really written them.
Well, your book, the Chuck Berry book, which I definitely cite in Looking to Get Lost, is really a tribute both to Chuck's, writing and to the persistence of his editor.
entirely a tribute to Chuck's writing. But among the many books truly written by musicians, do you have any favorites?
I probably do, and I probably have written about them. The Art Pepper book, I think, I think it's written by his wife, but that's a remarkable book. I always liked Charles Mingus's Beneath the Underdog.
Yeah.
But the Chuck Berry, I think, is my favorite.
Oh.
I'm not saying, wait a minute, I will go find somebody on this, pull somebody in off the street, have them ask me the question, I'll give it the same answer.
That is truly a unique and individual voice in there. That is him. And being next to him as he was writing it was a lifetime, a great experience of my life.
Well, and what's so remarkable about it is that the tone of it, the indirection, the sort of both the evasiveness and the manner in which he communicates a message which is veiled but present.
Yeah.
The wit, the cleverness, and in some ways the inability to confront directly some of the things that, it mirrors so exactly, it mirrors the songs, and it just expresses his personality in such a way, and it's consistently engaging and consistently well written. So I guess I would, I don't know that there are a ton of books written by, that I know of. There probably are many more that I don't know of, but I don't know that there are a ton of books that I can think of written by the musician, him or herself.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of them have help, but Chuck's was all his own. Now, I noticed reading this book that the musicians of whom you write are mostly of a particular generation. I think there's only one artist in here who was not working steadily in the 1960s at the latest, and that's Elvis Costello. He's the only artist you write about who doesn't go back that far. Can you imagine writing a book like Looking to Get Lost about artists of the 21st century? Do you have the engagement with music that's being made now that you had with the music that you fell in love with when you were young?
Well, yeah, I think I have the engagement, but the engagement tends to be with, I always go back to the blues. No, I feel like, yes, absolutely. I could imagine doing it. I could imagine doing it about, who's the thing with the Alabama Shakes? She is so great. I'm, I feel fully as engaged by what she does.
As I was reading this book, I kept thinking about the different kinds of creation that these performers you love so much undertake. There is the creation of a song, like Doc Thomas and Lieber and Stoller, so they create songs, and then all these artists who create songs and perform them. So many of the people you write about, Merle Haggard, John Cash, Ray Charles, on and on, they create this entity of song and perform it in the studio and live. And you devoted much of your life to writing about a person, Elvis Presley, who never wrote a song in his life. He was entirely an interpreter, a recording artist, and a performer of other people's
One song.
Was that Long Black Limousine?
No, that's Someone You Never Forget, which could be said to be about his mother. It's a beautiful song. It's probably mostly written by Red West, but he took legitimate credit, co-writing credit on it.
Sure. But are these different kinds of creation that all are wrapped up in these people you love, whose work you love? Are they different creations, or is it all just one thing, do you think?
I think it's all one thing. I mean, I think somebody like Jerry Lee Lewis, for example, every time he sings a song, every time he steps on stage, he's creating something fresh. He's creating something new. And as he said, yeah, I could have been a great songwriter, I guess, but I didn't want to focus on that. I didn't want to waste my energies on that. But I think every song that he sings is like that. Somebody like Elvis is different in the sense that he bores in on a song. And rather than sing it differently every time, he's looking for the intensity. And actually, this may not be his greatest song, it's a wonderful song, but if you look at the song that he ended his the '68 special with, If I Can Dream, and you look at the way he just goes all out on it, all out. And the first time I heard it on the album, the soundtrack album, I thought that's really, I mean, first time I heard it was watching him on TV. Then I listened to the soundtrack album and I thought, God, it sounds like he goes flat. He's so carried away, he goes flat on the last note. I mean, not that I'm that kind of a critic or know that much. And then years later, I heard 3 or 4 different takes of the song. He ended up on the same note every single time, purposefully. Somebody like Chuck Berry is an exception to the rule in some ways, in the sense that he didn't perform, for the most part, in a way that reflected what he felt at the moment. He performed in a way, he had certain gimmicks. He had the duck walk, he had the split, he had, he just had different ways of presentation. And he used them, and they were crowd pleasing, and they were great. They were sensational. But he neither put together a band which could respond in the way that he described to you. He couldn't have a dialogue with the bass player because he didn't have a bass player except in the studio. And he also, and the songs didn't vary considerably in live performance, at least not for the most part. So that's kind of different. I mean, whereas you see Merle Haggard, he was not the greatest live performer. He was a very erratic live performer, and sometimes he could reach supernal heights, and sometimes you felt like he just didn't want to be there. But at the same time, if he was miserable, you knew it in his performance. And just like Billy Joe Shaver, I mean, his performances, he gave Waylon Jennings the songs for Honky Tonk Heroes, and he performs them himself. And Waylon would be another example. But I mean, Billy Joe Shaver would be an extreme example of someone who, like Howlin' Wolf, his performance is always going to reflect how he feels at that exact moment.
I want to talk about the writers that the novelists. You have 2 among all these great singers and songwriters and performers, musicians. You have 2 novelists, Lee Smith and Henry Green, as examples of true originality and the creative urge and your experiences with them. Is there a different book that you could have written that would have been entirely about writers, or were these the only 2 writers you were ever drawn to?
Oh, no, I absolutely. I never could find there was a brief time when I was writing for Paste when I was able to review a few books by writers that I liked, but I never found that editors were particularly open. Sam Phillips always talked about, there shouldn't be any categories. People shouldn't be put in a bag, but you are, and I'm not putting myself in a bag, but there were 2 other. They weren't profiles. They were profiles, but they weren't first-hand profiles of writers that I thought about including in the book. One was Zora Neale Hurston, which I wrote just when the Robert Hemingway biography came out, when most of her books were out of print. I mean, I had to go looking all around for it. And I was very proud of it, and I tried to portray Zora as I felt she was. I felt like at this point, with all the Zorification that's gone on, it wasn't that I thought there was anything wrong with what I wrote, but I thought I just had no standing to do it. The other person was Mark Harris, whom I got to know a little bit after I'd written about him. And he was a novelist. People know him mostly for Bang the Drum Slowly, but he's a wonderful novelist and pretty diverse. And so, yeah, I could conceive of, writing a book I'd love to do a profile of Jess Walter, just a great writer. Every novel is different. I would have loved to have done a profile of Alice Munro, who's my idol, or Grace Paley, whom I knew slightly, both when I was a kid and then much later. And her antic and politically committed spirit, I would have felt perfectly comfortable with that. But, as I went around, I've always operated on my own. I've never worked for anybody. I've never, I've always initiated my own projects. But just as I was unable, at one point, before I fully committed to the Sam Phillips biography, I think you know this, but maybe you don't. I thought, the thing I'd most like to do at this point, don't tell Sam this, okay? Whatever you do, don't tell Sam. The thing I'd most like to do at this point would be a biography of Willie Mays. And I couldn't figure out a way to approach him, to break down the barriers. I mean, I had a certain reputation in a certain area. That, from my point of view, was not everything of who I was. There was nothing false about it, but it was just as applicable. And I sort of, I searched around a little bit, tried to find somebody who knew Willie Mays some way into the baseball world. A friend of mine was field manager for one of the major league teams. I tried him, but anyway, so that didn't work. And then the same thing with I've been approached. I mean, I don't get approached anymore, but so many times to write book reviews for a variety of publications, not underground publications, the publications that people like to be published in. And I mean, I'm glad to be anywhere. I want my work to come out as I wrote it and as it is. But they'd come to me. There's a new book about Bo Diddley. There's a new book about it was always music books, and I wasn't going to write a review of a music book because I felt like you occupy too proprietary a role. I mean, if you praise it, it looks like you're trying to curry favor with the person. Maybe if you write a bad review, which I wouldn't do, I wouldn't take on a book. But if you do, it's as if you're trying to cut off the competition. And so I would say, well, no, I'd like to. I mean, but I'd be glad to write a review of William Trevor's new collection of stories. And I think half the people I talked with said, well, what a pretentious jerk, he doesn't. But these are the things, that I was just as passionate about as I am about Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf. So yes, absolutely, that would have been, and the Lee Smith was so much fun to write. And I thought, well, maybe this is a new chapter. And it was a new chapter in this book, but it wasn't a new chapter in terms of what I got the opportunity to write.
That leads me to my last question, which is
when we just got started,
which is about books. You end your book talking about your grandfather and how he was one of the people who inspired your love of books and ultimately your love of writing. But books were the ultimate thing because they were the instigators of the most passionate discussions. And I just thought that was a beautiful characterization of your relationship and that inspiration. And I wondered if you imagined as you're writing this book the passionate discussions that might come out of it. Can you imagine identify one passionate discussion that you hope your book is inspiring in people?
I think what I hope it inspires is the breakdown of barriers, the breakdown of categorization, the idea that there is no such thing as high culture, low culture, mid cult. What was it called? Dwight McDonald's book about mid something or other. The idea that all of these things are worthy of consideration on their own merits, and that it isn't just pretentiousness, that you can equally appreciate the poetry of John Donne and the blues of Robert Johnson, that they're each in many ways striving for the same thing. But the main thing is, there shouldn't be when I was a kid, when I went off to college, Columbia had, like the University of Chicago, they had a kind of great books program. Where I forget what they called it, contemporary civilization. The idea was that you would be equipped when you got done with your education at Columbia, which was a terrible place at that time. I know it's a very good place. My daughter Nina went to Barnard and just loved it, and it was a completely different place. But there, during the orientation week before I left, which was after about 2 days, the talk was all about preparing you for the cocktail party of life. So you would be able to talk in an informed way about all these things, which was it was a set, formatted, what today people say dead white males or something. That's all the people. But it doesn't matter whether it's dead white males. It doesn't. It shouldn't be any one thing. And that was the concept, that there were these great books, there was this or that. And for me, everything was and remains living. That was what was so great about my grandfather. Although my other grandfather, I've got books by my other grandfather, the Lanny Budd books, the Upton Sinclair books, the Sinclair Lewis's Can't Happen Here. I've got those. I mean, it's not that they're valuable editions, they're just valuable because he owned them. But books, again, were just an instigation for a passionate discussion, for a conversation about things that mattered way beyond the books. And, I'm in touch with a friend of mine, Steve Frappia, who I originally met, I don't know, when he was about 18 or 19 years old, managing the record department at the Harvard Coop. He's a little younger than I am. And we met, I think, in line for a Skip James concert or show at Club 47. And we continue to argue. I continue to argue with Peter Wolf, whom I met at the same time for the same reason. Well, is Little Walter or Big Walter? Walter Horton, or how about Sonny Boy Williamson, or how about this? And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you prefer this writer. I mean, I say Alice Munro, and you say, well, I find it just isn't sufficiently plotted. I like this or that. It doesn't matter. It's just, it's a jumping off point, and it's a jumping off point for talking about life. And so that's really, with this book, I've never wanted to have a proselytizing purpose. I enjoyed writing this so much, and I wanted readers to enjoy it as much as I did. And I wanted them to meet all these people that I really, as you say, that I really loved. And I love seeing them all together. And I get such a kick out of the party that I have in the prologue, where I've got Lee Smith, taking care of all these hurt feelings, Merle Haggard's hurt feelings, Charlie Rich's agoraphobia, Howlin' Wolf is kind of sulling in a corner. Lee wrote to me recently, said, boy, you gave me a lot of duty. You really, she says, but I love that party. And that's the message most of all.
Well, this book is a beautiful party, and readers are going to love getting lost inside it, as I have loved getting lost inside this conversation with you, Peter. Thank you so much for talking to me and talking to us on The Current, and thank you for this book. Be well.
I know it's really been fun. I've enjoyed it, and as I have enjoyed almost every minute since 1992.
Thank you, Peter.
Hachette,